Realm presents Remade, Season 1, Episode 4.
Loki peered into the dark trees beyond the camp. Something rustled in the underbrush. Not for the first time in this long night, he wished he could turn up the volume like he did on his headphones at home, adjust the contrast on a monitor. Cheating a little, so he could see more details in the oppressive blackness outside their tiny, fragile circle of light. But as he had to keep reminding himself, this wasn't a game. God, he missed his computer. Setting up base in the clearing had seemed like the most natural thing to do, but now it seemed foolish, knowing they were surrounded by an unfriendly, unknown wilderness, crawling with creatures that could kill them. Unimaginable creatures. Impossible creatures. Their whole situation was impossible. As far as they could tell, they had each been transported here at the precise moment they had died. Or been resurrected? Saved, some of them even called it. Hiram insisted they were all still dead, existing in some kind of messed-up purgatory. Loki glanced at Cole, resting by the fire 10 feet away, possibly dying. Try telling him they were already dead. Maybe Loki should have tried harder to convince the others to relocate, move to higher ground if they could find it. Maybe shelter in a defensible cave or the nearby ruins. Perhaps they could have found a stable roof, real walls, preferably a sturdy door with a deadbolt. But other voices were louder than his, and he didn't want to push too hard. Not until he had to. People, even the ones you trusted, could turn on you quickly, and the other kids were practically strangers. He had been useful here so far, so some of them actually liked and trusted him. He had to keep it that way if things were going to go differently this time around. That's what second chances were for, right? There was the rustling again. Loki's muscles were tensed, ready, but he willed himself not to scramble to his feet or shout an alarm or shut down from terror. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head to follow the sound, the movements of something. Some thing that was moving equally slowly. Stalking. Loki reached his left hand down for a rock from the pile at his knee. He felt around, eyes locked straight ahead, until he found one the size of a baseball. He picked it up, rolled it in his hand, and wrapped his fingers around it the way he thought pitchers did. The creature could be anything. The sow they'd seen a few days ago, or killer bunnies. It didn't have to be the toothy cat that had scratched Cole and knocked him out of that tree. He hoped it wasn't. Loki stilled and caught his breath when he saw a glimmer in the darkness directly ahead of him. 2 small glowing orbs, eyes staring back at him. They had caught the reflection of the dying fire for a moment, reminding Loki of his obnoxious cat, Meowth, looking up at him innocently from beneath his desk after biting his ankle. Only this cat was 10 times the size of Meowth, still had all its claws, and also had very long, very sharp teeth. Cole moaned by the fire. The cat eyes disappeared. Not knowing where the predator was made Loki even more nervous, but the soft sound of its movement faded. To the west, in the direction of the ruined city. Loki relaxed, just as well. The last rock he had tossed to scare it off had gone wild, and his left shoulder still twinged from the effort. "What's with the rock?" Loki jumped. He turned to see Cole propped up on his elbows, blinking in the light from the fire. Loki jerked his head toward the trees. "Saw something." "Oh, I was worried you were about to brain me." Cole chuckled and then started coughing. Loki dropped the rock like it was his sister's underwear accidentally pulled from the laundry basket. "Why would I do that?" Loki jammed his hands into his jumpsuit's pockets and balled them into tight fists. "Have they been talking about me?" he worried. He hadn't intended for Cole to get hurt. Loki might blame himself for letting it happen on his watch, but did everyone else think it was his fault too? "I don't know. You looked intense." Cole coughed again. His voice was weak and dry. Loki brought Cole a canteen and helped him sip water. He shook the canteen and heard a hollow slosh, almost empty. This was the last of the water supply. They'd have to send another group to refill their bottles at the stream today and boil the water for safety. "Thanks." Cole licked his cracked, raw lips. "Sorry about what I said. I'm not thinking straight. I've been having nightmares. Imagining scary things out there. No problem. Loki relaxed his fists. Hey, but keep that rock handy. It might be more humane to put me out of my misery sooner. Promise to make it quick? You aren't going to die. Loki tilted his head. Again. Cole smiled. You should go back to sleep. Loki settled in next to Cole by the fire. I've been doing nothing but. What about you? It's still Gabe and Sebastian's watch, isn't it? Gabe's securing the perimeter. But when I came to check on you, I found Sebastian dozing off, so I sent him to bed. Loki didn't mention how Sebastian had suffered a full-blown panic attack when Loki woke him. Must have been having a nightmare. Like I told Nevaeh, I don't need a babysitter. Cole grumbled. Just keeping the snakes and crawlies off you, Loki said lightly. With his injuries, Cole couldn't sleep off the ground in a hammock like everyone else, and animals had a way of finding defenseless prey like him. Like all of them right now. Well, I do appreciate that. Don't hold it against Sebastian, he's a good kid, with a real pretty voice. He sang a lullaby to help me sleep, same one I used to sing. Cole's voice cracked. He gingerly lowered himself back down and groaned. He wiped a hand across his sweaty forehead. You have a mild fever, Loki said. If it gets worse, there could be an infection. That's what Nevaeh says anyway. She was very concerned about Cole's worsening condition. She was very concerned about everyone, for that matter. Forget it. What do you see out there? Cole asked. The tiger. You sure? I'm not imagining things, Loki snapped. He kicked a short branch into the fire. I didn't say you were. Cole had that tone of voice that people used when they were trying to calm Loki down, humoring him. It's been circling the camp all night, closing in. But it just came right up to the fire. We looked at each other, Loki said. Then we're in trouble. Back home, when a fox went after our hens, we had to deal with it or it would keep coming back. Another night, and who knows, it could enter the camp. We should leave. Loki prodded the glowing embers of the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks, smoke, and ash. We should have moved days ago. He tossed another log onto it and blew gently to help the dry wood catch. Loki had gotten the credit for the fire, but it had been the real Boy Scout who had banged those rocks together while Loki watched. How could Hiram be so smart and capable and still believe they were in some afterlife anyway? I'm finally convinced you're right, Cole grunted as he shifted his injured leg. But I can't go anywhere with this Something large emerged from a break in the trees and loped silently toward them. Loki scrambled to his feet. He pulled the stick from the fire, the business end of it blazing like a torch. He waved it in front of him and swore when he saw Umta's wrinkled, hairy face peering at him, unperturbed. Why are you sneaking around? He asked. Breakfast. She handed him 2 freshly killed rabbits, tied together at their hind legs with vine. Then she saw Cole, lying in his torn and bloody jumpsuit, legs splinted with branches and vines, and her peaceful expression shattered. What happened? She rushed to his side. He had an accident. Loki explained about their run-in with the saber-toothed tiger yesterday. Had she been gone that long without him noticing? And all she had to show for it were 2 measly rabbits? Umta fussed over Cole while the sky around them turned gray and the forest stirred to greet the new day. One by one, the other teens slipped out of their hammocks. Holden looked like he had slept less than Loki, with dark circles under his eyes and an uncharacteristic listlessness. Wesley couldn't stop yawning, even as he was gaping at Cole and exclaiming how it was a miracle he was still alive. Amelia headed straight over to the fire to change Cole's bandages, her curly hair even wilder and redder than usual, looking aflame in the morning sun. Loki gave her some space and watched her work. Amelia's hands moved confidently, efficiently, which was her standard M.O. Loki knew a military brat when he saw one. The friendly, almost cheerful chatter that had filled most mornings had been replaced by funereal silence, punctuated by brief, sniping comments. Everyone had woken up on the wrong side of the hammock. Most of the group went about their morning business like zombies, taking trips to the stream to wash up, heading for the latrine. Nevaeh joined Amelia and Umta at Cole's side and conferred with them. Loki took a deep breath, counted to 10, exhaled. He could do this. He needed to do this. He climbed up onto a large block of concrete a short distance from the fire. He placed the dead rabbits at his feet and raised his hands. "Hey, everyone!" He gestured them closer. "Guys, we need to talk." Slowly, the other teens gathered, drifting over in clusters of 2 or 3. Amazing that even here, in the middle of nowhere, most of the kids had been settling into new cliques. Loki still preferred to keep to himself. It was safer that way. "What's up?" Jingwei folded her arms. The group looked at Loki expectantly, curiously. Attracting their attention like this always made him nervous, but this was important. It was life or death. Loki pointed into the trees. "The tiger found us early this morning." People started murmuring. "It's stalking us." He looked around. Wisps of mist clung to the wet grass as the clearing filled with early morning sunlight. "We're too exposed. We can't defend ourselves here in the open. Or at all," he thought. "If it's not the tiger, other wild animals will find us eventually." "Or worse," Holden muttered. "This again?" Jingwei said. "We've already voted to stay. We'll build better shelters. I can make something to warn us when animals get too close and scare them off." Gabe nodded. "We're all freaked by what happened to Cole, but we're safe here." "If we were safe, we wouldn't sleep in trees," Hiram said. "Well, we're safe in the trees," Gabe said. "Cole wasn't," Wesley said. They all looked at Cole. Despite his protests, he had fallen asleep again, or he was pretending to sleep. Nevaeh was gently stroking his damp hair. "Once a fox gets into the henhouse, it will keep coming back until you deal with it," Loki said. "Nobody here but us chickens," Wesley said. The rest of the group instinctively drew closer together, even as they began to argue and talk over one another. Even Alex, the boy with his eyes permanently fixed on his feet, shifted uneasily toward the others. But of course he didn't join the discussion. "So, I'm going after the cat," Loki announced, silencing the babble. Everyone looked at him again, this time with a mix of shock, admiration, and disbelief. Even Alex snapped his head up and blew a fringe of dark hair out of his eyes to stare. Loki grinned. He could get used to this. "Are you insane?" May said. "Do you have a death wish?" Saya said. "Or is this a macho revenge thing?" Loki quirked the right side of his mouth into a half smile. No one had ever accused him of being macho before. "The cat followed us. It came within 100 feet of our base." Loki pointed to where he had last seen those glowing eyes in the forest. "It's already hurt us, and we can't defend ourselves. We have to hunt it before it hunts us, preferably before nightfall." "So it's kill or be killed?" Gabe shook his head. "How are you going to take it down?" Loki thought he heard some emphasis on you. Loki spread his hands. "I'm not going to fight it. I was thinking we would build a trap." Jingwei perked up. "We know where it likes to travel. I bet it killed that razor moose Hiram found," Loki said. "Such a cool name," Wesley said. "So we need to bait it with something it wants." Loki leaned down and picked up the 2 rabbits. He held them high, like Perseus presenting Medusa's head in Clash of the Titans. Umta sighed. "No way. We barely have enough food as it is," May said. "Until Cole dies," Wesley said. They all stared at him. "What? Everyone was thinking it," he said. "Right?" "Jesus, he could hear you," Gabe said. "And we aren't going to do the cannibalism thing, Wesley. Don't worry, Cole," he added more loudly. Sure. Not yet." Wesley turned to look at Cole. He was still sleeping, but Nevaeh looked pissed. "Do you even know anything about wild cats?" May asked Loki. "Let alone a supposedly extinct one?" "I've made traps before. I got this," Loki said. "You can't do it alone," Holden said. "You volunteering?" Loki asked. Holden glanced at Saya. That poor guy had it for her bad. "Yeah. You'll need all the help you can get if you want to build this today. I'll do it." Saya turned up her nose. "This is dangerous and stupid." "I'll help. I built a corral trap with my grandpa on his ranch, Hiram said. Terrific, Loki said. Jingwei, we could definitely use your skills. Jingwei was already drawing designs in the dirt with a stick. On it, but we'll need to use some of our salvage on this. You want to take our food and supplies? May said. Can we vote on this? We can do nothing and spend another sleepless night because we're afraid and risk someone else getting hurt, or we can take some initiative and protect ourselves, Holden said. Gabe crossed his arms. Damn straight. I'm with you, Loki. Count me in, too, said the Desi girl. What was her name? Sarita? Sunita, that was it. Loki had noticed Sunita before because she seemed to try to not be noticed. She kept to herself even more than he did. Loki couldn't remember if she had ever spoken up in a group like this. Of course, he'd first noticed Sunita because she was pretty, athletic with wavy black hair to her shoulders. Even though they all wore identical red outfits, in her jumpsuit, standing there with one hand on a cocked hip, she looked like a kick-ass video game hero. Sweet, Loki said. She winked at him. Okay. Wesley bounced on the balls of his feet. I'll come too. Loki rolled his eyes. Whatever. He swung the rabbits at his side. Maybe Wesley would make better bait, he thought. Loki hunched behind a boulder and peeked around it on the left. He lifted the crossbow. When he peered through the scope, the 1080p graphics were so detailed he saw glistening beads of water dripping down the wolf's muzzle as it lapped water from a creek. The wolf's ears twitched and swiveled in his direction, and Loki froze. He had already encountered the wolf once in this playthrough. Loki had stabbed her in the shoulder with a hunting knife until she released her clamp-like hold on his arm, but the beast had escaped, leaving Loki in much worse shape and taking his knife with her. He shifted the scope. The short blade was still buried in the wolf's gory shoulder. The lost weapon was the least of his problems. Loki had taken a lot of damage in their brief, bloody scuffle. He remembered his heart beating loudly, the color seeping out of the world, darkness clouding the edges of his vision. He walked slowly now, limping, and every second drained his meager life force. He needed to find medicine, but he knew the chances of that on this remote island were slim to none. If he was going to die anyway, he was taking the bitch with him, but more carefully, from a distance. His thumb twitched on the trigger button. Just as he was about to fire an arrow at his quarry, she bolted. Loki cursed. He hobbled after her, following the trail of blood bright against the dirt path. When he finally found her, he swore again. The wolf was already dead. No, she was dying, bleeding out. She had fallen into a pit. Not any old pit. Someone had dug a long, deep trench and planted wooden pikes at the bottom. The turf and leaves scattered around the opening and the heaving body of the wolf suggested the pit had been covered, and the bloody leg of a deer lying among the pikes must have been the bait. It was a clever way to kill an animal, but damn it, this had been Loki's wolf. He was also annoyed that he hadn't thought of it first, before he'd tussled with a wild animal and brought himself close to death. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Too late, Loki wondered who had made the trap. Someone was attacking him from behind. Red flashed across his vision with each blow. He fell, unable to get back on his feet, but he twisted around to see his attacker. A muscle man, hacking at him with a hatchet made from a broken shard of glass tied to a rough club. Nice crafting, Loki thought as he died. The worst thing about massively multiplayer online games was the multiplayer part. He loved the survival part of MMOGs, but the PvP aspect was, well, killer. Right now, the other player, his username was Termin8or, one Loki didn't recognize, was probably raiding his body for his gear. Loki would have to start all over again at the cave, naked. A taunt flashed on his screen. Termin8or. You have lots of fans on Instagram, Loki. Grinny face. Then everything went black. Game over. Loki shuddered in frustration and pulled off his headphones, shoving his chair away from his desk. The hell was that all about? Instagram. Loki grabbed his phone from where he'd tossed it on his bed and noticed the slew of new Instagram notifications. Someone had tagged his username in an image. When he tapped on a notification, his game avatar filled the screen. Oh no. No, 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 no. 162 shitty likes already. View all 93 comments. He tapped on the link and read the comments through hot tears. Nice abs, Omri. You look way better than Tom Hiddleston, wink. I didn't know God's got acne. Must be all that mead. Lose some weight there, bro. OMG, this looks just like you, not. Lame. Loser. Get a life. Take a break from gaming and shower sometime. Does looking at your character give you a boner, LOL? I guess they didn't have deodorant in the medieval times. Loki, will you go out with me? Loki's an even dumber name than Omri. His hand trembled as he swiped up and up and up, displaying more and more comments, mostly posted by fellow classmates from the Excelsior School of Saratoga Springs, but also plenty from assholes he didn't know from other local schools and beyond. Shit. Damn it. Shit, shit, shit. Omri massaged his aching right wrist while he thought. Who had done this? Only 2 people knew Omri's character name, which he used in all his games, and his sister Rena would never do something like this to him. That left one person, Brody Knight, his former best friend. He and Brody used to play first-person shooters together after school, on weekends, late at night, every chance they could get. But not anymore. Rena wasn't online, of course. She was too busy saving other people these days. He sent her a text message anyway. Need to talk ASAP SOS. But he hoped he could stop this before she got back to him, before she saw this shit that was going down. With a trembling finger, he swiped back up to the screenshot of his character. Sure enough, it had been posted by @BrodyK, tagging @OS. He untagged himself, but the image was still out there, getting more comments and likes and shares by the minute. It was going viral, and it was making Omri sick. What a shit system. Anyone could post anything they wanted about you online and you couldn't do a thing about it. You could report it, sure, but to whom? And the damage was already done. The damage was ongoing and catastrophic. He texted Brody. Dude, WTF, take that shit down. No response. He tried again. Come on, he hesitated. Please, he added. A new notification popped up on his phone, a screenshot of his desperate text to Brody. Omri slapped his desk in frustration. That bastard! Someone knocked at his door. What? Omri spat out. Everything okay, sweetheart? His mother called. Yeah, I died again. Omri rubbed his sleeve across his face. He didn't want his parents to know he'd been crying. Oh, she sighed. He knew the weary look that accompanied that expression of disappointment. Well, turn off your game and come to dinner. Be right there. He hit escape on his gaming keyboard and logged out of Steam, wishing it was that easy to switch off the real world. The away team, as Wesley kept calling it, Loki, Jingwei, Holden, Gabe, Wesley, Hiram, and Sunita, gathered around the intricate schematics Jingwei had drawn in the dirt. Jingwei reminded Loki of his sister. She was self-assured, competent, confident, and she treated Loki like an equal. Even her short brown hair reminded him of Rena's ranger school regulation cut, but more disheveled with blue and green streaks. Hanging around Jingwei reminded him of home, in the better days. Loki, the trap you described is usually called a Burmese tiger pit. She gestured at her drawing. We dig a deep trench, probably 8 to 10 feet ought to do it. We line the bottom with spikes, cover it up so it looks like undisturbed ground, and set our bait. Gabe leaned over Jingwei's head. Did you learn how to make these back home? Jingwei pushed her mouth to one side and gave him a withering glance. Dude, first of all, my family is from Taiwan, not Myanmar. And second, I was born and raised in the US of A, like you. Sorry, Gabe said. I just figured. I know what you figured. I saw the trap on Animal Planet, okay? Hey, I read about something like this in a story in English class, Holden said. About some rich guy hunting other people in the jungle? He looked around at the rest of them. "Sounds like the Hunger Games," Sunita said. "Now that'd be fun." "All I remember is someone digs a trap like this, right? But his opponent doesn't fall for it," Holden said. "Ha! Nice one!" Wesley held up his hand for a high five. Holden left him hanging. "Come on! Fall for it because it's a pit?" "I get it," Holden sighed. "Well, this tiger isn't a literary allegory or whatever," Loki said. "And I doubt it's read that story, so we should be good." "Don't we need tools to make this?" Holden asked. Jingwei pointed to the junk pile. "We've collected all that random stuff from the space elevator station and the ruins." "That's where we got the shovel to dig the latrine outside of camp," Gabe said. "Maybe we can find some more. We'll also need something to sharpen the sticks for the pit." Loki looked at Sunita. "And can you collect the backpacks? Anything else we can use to carry dirt away from the hole?" She flashed him a thumbs up. "How about weapons?" Holden asked. "We should keep an eye out for anything that can work, like clubs, spears, knives, that kind of thing. Even a board with a nail in it." "The whole point is not to fight the tiger," Jingwei said. "But just in case," Holden said. "Just in case what? The trap doesn't work?" Jingwei said. "It's going to work, lucky for you." "What is that supposed to mean?" Holden asked. Jingwei rolled her eyes. "You wouldn't— Weapons are a good precaution," Loki said quickly. "And we might have to finish the tiger off once it's in the hole." "Better to be prepared," Hiram said. Loki squinted up at the sun. They had clear skies, at least. "Okay, it's about 9 now. Looks closer to 8, Hiram said. 8, yeah, that's what I meant, Loki said. "Let's try to get all this stuff ready by midday so we can start building the trap. If we work fast, we can finish it by sundown." When Loki returned with an armful of roughly 2-inch thick, 3-foot-tall sticks, he deposited them with Hiram and Wesley for sharpening, and then went to rummage through the diminishing junk pile himself. He selected a foot-long metal pole that was surprisingly light and a rusted trowel with a split handle. He found some flexible cable on a spool, which he used to secure the trowel blade to the end of the pole, pointing up. He tested the balance of the homemade spear. Not bad. He looped the rest of the cable, almost 12 feet long, around his waist. He kept poking around, hoping to find duct tape to wrap around the spear to improve his grip. He tossed aside what looked like a dented lunchbox, and then paused when he heard something clunk inside it. He went back for it. The lock on it was rusted shut, but he pried it off with the tip of the trowel blade. When he opened the box, he found what looked like a big staple gun made from the same speckled gray metal as the pole. Loki checked that no one else was around, rubbing his wrists even though they hadn't hurt since he arrived here. He reached for the gun, hesitated. He took a deep breath and picked it up. It wasn't as heavy as a real gun, but it felt comfortingly solid and fit in his hand like it was made for it. He looked it over, identifying first the safety button and activating it, and then the trigger. With a bit of difficulty, he separated the grip into 2 pieces, sliding off a cartridge containing 7 pointed rivets, tiny obsidian pyramids. There were slots for 3 more rivets, and one of them was already in the gun's chamber. How much power did this thing have? He didn't want to waste any ammo, but he needed a sense of its range and lethalness. Loki snapped the clip back into the gun and walked away from the camp for 10 minutes until he found another clearing in the woods. He released the safety and aimed at a boulder 30 feet away. His hands trembled. He gripped the gun more tightly and pulled the trigger. He felt a gentle recoil and heard a woof, followed by a great pop. He winced and shuddered at the sound of the gun firing. Loki waited for someone to shout or come running, but no one seemed to have heard it. He hurried up to the boulder. The rivet had pierced the center of it. Bullseye! Bam! Hairline cracks surrounded the rivet, 3/4 of which was embedded in stone. He pulled on the end of the projectile with his thumb and forefinger and tried to wiggle it free, but it was stuck fast. He wasn't a math whiz, but with this much force it was certainly a deadly weapon, at least over a short distance. Loki removed the ammo clip and emptied the chamber. Carefully pointing the gun straight up and away from his face, he pulled the trigger again. This time he heard a bigger whoosh. This baby was pneumatic. Wait until the others see this. By the time he made it back to the junk pile, Loki had reconsidered. It probably wasn't a good idea to waltz into camp brandishing a gun. He knew how easy it was for people to draw the wrong conclusions and overreact. In fact, did he have to tell anyone about his discovery right away? They didn't have time for distractions right now. The sun was already directly overhead. He would tell them about the gun after they dealt with the tiger. It could come in handy before the day was over. Loki carefully stowed the gun and ammunition in his backpack. He slung the bag over his left shoulder, retrieved his makeshift spear, and then went to rally the troops. Omri's mom handed him the casserole dish. Potato kugel again. She was still cooking Rena's favorite meals, even though his sister hadn't been home in 8 months. Omri shoveled a spoonful onto his plate next to the chicken and passed the dish to his dad. "Your guidance counselor called this morning," Dad said. Omri froze with his fork spearing the chicken, knife hovering above it. Mrs. Ehrlich had caught him eating his lunch in an empty English classroom one day. He'd begged her not to tell his parents. She'd promised she wouldn't, because he was going to. But of course he hadn't. "She says your grades are slipping," Dad said. His mother put her fork down with a clatter. "Oh, Omri." She said it as if she and his father hadn't already discussed it and planned this moment. "Only in social studies. They give us too much reading." Global history was boring. He didn't see what use it would ever be to him. "Math, too," his dad said. "Maybe you could get all your homework done if you spent less time playing those computer games," his mom said. Omri sighed. "Don't take that tone with your mother," his dad said. "I didn't even say anything. I have to breathe, don't I?" "She's right, buddy. All that time in front of a screen, it can't be healthy," his father went on. "And the keyboard. You're just asking for carpal tunnel." Omri twisted his right hand 180 degrees and felt something click and pop into place. Sore wrists aside, going online and playing video games felt like the only safe activity Omri had left. Up until this evening, anyway. Now they were taking even that small haven from reality away from him, turning it against him. "Is there anything you want to tell us?" his dad asked. "Mrs. Ehrlich says you haven't been acting like yourself." What if he told his parents what was going on? Maybe that would get them off his back. Omri fiddled with his knife. "Actually, something has been, but if you don't get your grades up, you'll be kicked out of JROTC, Mom said. "That won't happen," Omri said, "because I'm not in JROTC. He certainly couldn't admit that, though. He'd tried JROTC, of course. He hadn't had a choice, with his dad a former Army NCO and his sister a first lieutenant. He'd thought it would be like the military campaigns in his favorite games, but it was only more schoolwork. Extra classes on leadership, history, geography. Even though there wasn't as much marching involved as he'd expected, it was a lot more physical activity than he was used to. The only thing he was good at was air rifle marksmanship, but he'd never had the chance to join Excelsior's team. Even though JROTC supposedly accepted everyone regardless of ability, Omri had washed out. Or more accurately, he'd given it up just after the semester started. But he'd been pretending that he was still going. He knew his parents would find out eventually, but he didn't want to deal with it. He was going to put that argument off as long as possible and make sure it was too late for them to force him to participate anyway. Omri eyed Rena's empty seat opposite his dad's at the head of the table. His parents wouldn't even let Omri sit there when she wasn't home. He was surprised they didn't set a place for her like she was the prophet Elijah. In their eyes, she was better than Elijah. The perfect student, the perfect daughter, the perfect soldier. He had all the same teachers at Excelsior that she'd had 7 years ago. They couldn't stop comparing the siblings. Somehow Omri always came up short next to her. Rena had graduated high school as salutatorian and then at the top of her class at West Point, and she was one of the first women to pass the rigorous U.S. Ranger School. Now she was flying military helicopters, too busy to keep up with weekly Skype chats with her brother. Omri simply wasn't built for the military. He knew it. The other kids in JROTC knew it. Why couldn't his parents see it? He always finished last in everything. He'd hoped he could leave the bullying behind by quitting, but no such luck. Quitting only made it worse. Quitting was the same as failing. And when he became too much of an embarrassment for Brody to hang out with in school, when some kids started rumors that they were dating, his old friend had quit him. Overnight, Brody had suddenly become one of his loudest enemies, and apparently a real asshole online. Well, he'd always been an asshole gamer. It was easy to be cruel when it was all anonymous, but he'd always had Omri's back. Tonight, he had painted a target on it instead. Need to choose whether to waste your time in a virtual world where nothing matters or do something meaningful with your life, his dad was saying. Omri had heard it all before. His mother nodded. Real life has consequences. You need to learn responsibility, Omri. Like your sister. You're part of society, and it's time you contributed to it. Look at Rena, she's saving lives. Omri chewed a rubbery piece of chicken, eyes downcast. Some lives aren't worth saving, he mumbled. What was that? Dad almost shrieked. Some of the other kids at school. They aren't good people. What are you trying to say? Dad asked. They're bullies, Omri said. Don't get involved, Dad said. I know you want to help when you see someone bullied, but they have to work it out on their own. Omri squeezed his hands around his fork and knife. There it was. His dad thought people who were bullied had to work it out on their own. And if he revealed that people were now harassing him online, they would use that as an excuse to limit his computer time, because nothing that happened on the internet had consequences in the real world according to them. WWYPSRD. What would your perfect sister Rena do? You're right. Thanks, guys. May I be excused? I'd like to catch up on some of that history reading. His mother looked at his nearly full plate doubtfully. Go on, buddy. His dad shot his mom a significant look that said he could stand to lose a little weight anyway. She nodded. Omri stood to go. Hold on. His father raised his bushy eyebrows in amusement. You can leave those here. Omri looked down and saw he was still clutching his fork and knife. He dropped them at his place and left. When Omri returned to his room and opened Instagram, the posted image of Loki had 209 comments and 430 likes. Fantastic. Omri disabled his Instagram account and logged back into Steam to pick up his game where he'd left off. Loki respawned inside a cave. He always stowed some simple clothes and basic gear here to get him started after a rare game death. He got dressed and emerged from his cave to find Termin 8-Or waiting for him with 2 other warrior characters. Omri knew who they were from class and his brief stint in JROTC. Eric_1999 and Ashton @SHT0N. They'd used their real names, idiots. Or maybe they just didn't care that he knew who they were. But that clued him into Termin 8-Or's identity. It had to be Brody. He was also the only one who knew where Loki's respawn point was. Termin 8-Or. Hey, say cheese. Brody was taking another screenshot of him. Shit! Loki raised his hunting knife, the only weapon his character had started with. But apparently he'd brought it to a gunfight, as Brody, Eric, and Ashton riddled him with bullets from their automatic weapons. Which shouldn't even be on that freaking island. Like, they should have to make their own gunpowder from elements lying around and shoot rocks from a hollowed-out bamboo reed, right? He should really mod a hardcore survival mode. Which didn't help him now because he was dead. Loki reappeared in his cave with even less in his inventory. He rushed back out of the cave, naked, into another hail of gunfire. Dead. Shit, Omri said. He couldn't play while those asshats were camping his corpse. Didn't they have anything better to do with their time? He logged out and launched Call of Duty 2, Rena's favorite game, the one she'd used to introduce Omri to gaming. If she'd kept at it, she could have played professionally. Instead, she'd decided to become a real soldier. Omri loaded up one of his favorite mods and started moving, ducking, firing, dodging. Bam! Headshot. Take that, Brody. Bam! Goodbye, Ashton. Bam, bam, bam! Die, Eric. Loki smiled. He was starting to feel much better. Loki watched as Hiram knelt on one knee and studied something on the ground. Hiram stood, wiping his hands on a leaf. He pointed deeper into the forest, where the foliage was getting denser. That way, he said confidently. What were you looking at? Holden asked. Scat, Hiram said. Scat? Holden leaned over to get a better look. Is that... shit? Hiram frowned. Please don't use that word. It's from a large animal, fairly fresh, still soft, but air temperature, and it isn't overrun with flies. Oh, barf, Wesley said. Loki, you were right. Looks like the tiger's been hanging out around here. If it's anything like its cousins in our world, it's been marking a trail, Hiram said. Jing Wei led the way in the direction Hiram had indicated, wielding her badass bladed melee weapons, the sharp antlers of the so-called razor moose, which she had cut from the carcass they found in the woods with a hand laser she had repaired. It would be sweet, poetic justice if the moose's scythe-like bones took out the tiger that had killed it. Loki's spear felt inadequate in comparison, even though Jing Wei had complimented him on his MacGyvering. Feeling the weight of the rivet gun in his backpack was much more reassuring. The rest of the group followed the path Jing Wei hacked and slashed through low-hanging branches, overgrown ferns and shrubs and hanging vines. The canopy of thick branches and leaves provided some protection from the hot afternoon sun, creating a murky, living tunnel dappled by pinpricks of light like stars in the night sky. Almost instinctively, they spoke in hushed voices. Be very, very quiet, Wesley said. Good advice, Loki said. You start. Wesley looked stricken, then lowered his head and trudged along. Gabe fell in beside Loki. The larger boy tilted his head toward him and lowered his voice. Go easy on Wesley, huh? He's trying to help. By being irritating? Loki said. We can use a laugh sometimes, especially now. He's nervous and scared. We all are. Okay, you've got a point, Loki said. I thought Hiram was the Boy Scout. Yeah, well, bad things can happen when you're nervous and scared. Gabe rubbed the back of his neck with his right hand, looking sheepish. I should know. They continued their march through the forest. Loki periodically used his spear to make gashes in trees, pointing the way back. Hiram paused a couple more times to correct their course, then indicated a break in the trees. Here, Hiram said. We're far enough from camp that no one will fall into the trap by accident. Sunita shuddered. Let's make sure everyone knows where it is when we get back, okay? Loki nodded. The creek's about 200 feet north of here. I'd bet the tiger beds down nearby, and the path is fairly well traveled. Hiram pointed out some half-hidden paw prints in the dirt. You think it's sleeping close by? Wesley asked, peering into the undergrowth nervously. Probably in a shady, cool spot, like some of those ruined buildings. Or maybe in a comfy tree? Hiram asked. Holden slowly looked up, perfectly mimicking the classic moment in horror movies when someone sees the monster dangling above them. He widened his eyes and pointed, mouth slack. Wesley squeaked and jerked his head up frantically. Gotcha, Holden said. Guys, Loki said. Let's focus. Hiram, this is perfect. Plenty of thick grass and branches to disguise the opening with. We can weave a mat out of some of these vines to lay the branches and leaves on. Jing Wei was measuring out the dimensions of the pit and laying branches in a rough 3x5 rectangle to mark off the outline. I had a better idea on the way over. A trap door covered in sod to help it blend in better. The Viet Cong made booby traps like that in the Vietnam War. She glared at Gabe, daring him to make another stupid comment about her background. What do you think? Loki masked his worry. He'd never built anything like that in his life, his real life, and it sounded a lot more complicated than tossing some branches on the hole. But she was right. It would be better disguised and more stable. I should have thought of that sooner. But can we build it before sundown? He asked. I'll take care of it. Phew. Good. Then let's start digging. The hole should be deep enough for Gabe to stand in it and be completely hidden. Even better if the opening is another foot or so above his head, Loki said. Holden and Gabe took the first shift digging with the 2 shovels they had found, and Hiram and Wesley collected and carried away the dirt piles. Meanwhile, Loki and Jing Wei mulled over the trap's design and the lightweight scrap metal they'd brought along. This flat panel is exactly the right size to cover that hole, Loki said. Jing Wei grinned. What a coincidence. We'll need to lay in a frame around the opening to attach the swinging door to, Loki said. She nodded. I had a couple of thoughts on that. Whatever you think is best. I'll prep the covering. Loki used his spear to cut into the grass-covered earth around the panel, deep enough to reach the roots. He pried up an edge of the 3x5 rectangular strip, working the roots free and lifting the soft dirt carefully. Then he slowly rolled it up like a grassy carpet. Worms and grubs fell and wriggled in the disturbed ground at his knees. By the time he had a heavy roll of sod, Jingwei had used her laser tool to weld a thin metal shaft to the bottom of the panel, cutting across it lengthwise. She was using a sharp stone to file matching grooves into the flat pieces that would be installed on each of the long sides of the pit. "Looking good," Loki said. Jingwei nodded and kept working. "Ow!" she said. She held up her hand and blood welled from a slice in her thumb. She stared at it. "Oh, crap, are you okay?" Loki asked. She was smiling. Jingwei?" She sucked at the wound and examined the cut again. "It's not deep." She held up both her hands. "I used to have a bunch of scars from cuts and burns. Working with machines is dangerous." She nodded to the trapdoor. "Even simple ones." She looked wistful. "I know where I got every one of those marks. I kind of miss them. I guess I'm starting over from scratch." Loki nodded. "So say we all." Unfortunately, Loki's scars weren't the physical kind. He wouldn't have minded the caretaker scrubbing his bad memories from his mind when they brought him back to life. "Here." Loki grabbed their first aid kit, such as it was, filled with herbs that Nevaeh had explained to them, something cotton-like she had harvested from plants in the forest, a water bottle, and some scrap material torn from their jumpsuits. He fished out a clean strip of fabric from a sleeve, added a tuft of cotton, and tied it loosely around Jingwei's injured thumb. It wasn't that bad a cut at all, but it could still get infected. They had to be careful. "Thanks." She admired his handiwork and returned to building the trap. Loki went to check on the pit and found Gabe still at it. The top of the trench came to his waist. He'd unzipped the upper portion of his jumpsuit and tied the sleeves around his waist. His tank top was hanging from a nearby branch, showing off his comic book superhero muscles. Holden rested nearby, jumpsuit unzipped to his waist and sleeves rolled up. Wesley had taken over digging from him, but he was going way too slowly. "We're running out of time." Loki jumped into the pit. He snatched the shovel from Wesley and started moving dirt alongside Gabe, grunting with the effort. "We still need to place the pikes and install the covering." The pikes had been measured for a 7-foot deep hole. If they didn't dig that far down, they'd have to cut down the poles, and there was still a lot of dirt piled around. "We're doing the best we can." Gabe swiped sweat from his forehead and glared at Loki. "I'm wiped." "We'll take shorter shifts then," Loki said. "Holden, wake up. Take over for Gabe. We gotta keep moving." "Keep moving," Omri thought. "Head down, just keep moving." The halls of his high school were covered in printouts of Loki next to Omri's junior high yearbook photo. Someone had scribbled Loki on his locker in black Sharpie. Mockery followed him from class to class. "Well met, Loki. How art thou? Verily 'tis a true likeness, think ye not?" Ashton called after him. 2 girls giggled. "Too bad he doesn't look anything like that in real life," one of them said. Omri sighed. "Keep moving." "Happy Thursday," said another boy as he passed between bells. "That's actually right," Omri muttered. Somehow he got through it. Lunch in the chemistry lab. Mrs. Ehrlich was out sick, so he didn't have to deal with her and share his feelings and all that nonsense. Gym class was rough, though. Even more than usual. They played touch football, and at first it was downright surreal. Omri was usually picked last for team sports, but today he was the first choice. Or rather, Loki was. The 2 team captains pretended to fight over him while the rest of the class laughed. "No way, I want Loki. I heard he killed 7 giants with 1 blow." "I heard he blew 1 giant 7 times, someone snarked. "Too late, I already picked him." At first it seemed like opposite day. His teammates kept throwing the ball to him and he only fumbled it a couple of times. Omri had only the vaguest notion of the rules of the game. But it became clear they were making fun of him when he tapped Jaden Murray between the shoulder blades and the tall boy sprawled forward, pratfalling like Omri had pushed him hard. "Ow! You don't know your own strength," Jaden cried. He would toss the football to someone and they would exaggerate the force of it with an oof and shake their hands. But it all seemed like harmless fun until after class when he found another of those pictures of Loki in his locker instead of his clothes. "Not funny," Omri yelled, his voice echoing in the locker room. Eric appeared at the end of the row of lockers. He held up Omri's sneaker. "You like gaming so much? We decided to give you a quest, Loki." Eric smirked and tossed the sneaker at Omri. He caught and dropped it. "Find the rest." And then Eric was gone. Shit. Omri opened every unclaimed locker in the room and only came up with one sock and his belt. Still wearing his gym shorts and t-shirt, he had to interrupt the PE class following his, a girls' class, to hunt behind the bleachers. There was his other shoe, among the basketballs, under the exercise mats. He checked the shower and found his black cargo pants hanging from a curtain rod. His Vasa's Pirates t-shirt was balled up in a toilet tank, soaked. Omri collapsed on his knees on the cold, sticky bathroom tiles and retched into the toilet. He spent the rest of that period there, huddled on the bathroom floor, slumped against the bowl. In the end, he missed fifth period algebra and never did find his other sock. Finally, the school day was over, but he couldn't go home yet. JROTC air rifle practice was after school, and as far as his parents knew, he was still participating, working toward his certification. It was the only thing he legitimately missed about the program. He sat in the school library on his laptop, killing time by killing Nazis in Wolfenstein, which was kind of like target practice. He kept the sound muted and listened for the soft pop of the air rifles in the shooting range behind the school. It was because of parents like his dad that the range was still there, despite the protests of other members of the PTA. Omri sort of agreed about shooting clubs promoting gun violence. They might not make someone bring a weapon to school, but they sure helped make that person a better shot. Then again, so did video games. It turned out that all the time his dad said he'd been wasting on shooting games had actually made Loki a decent marksman once he got used to handling a rifle. All those paintball outings with Rena had given him an edge too. As Omri packed up his computer, he realized that the whole day, his schoolmates had all called him Loki instead of Omri. They were making fun of him, sure, but in a way he felt like it was acceptance of his alternate identity. Maybe over time it would become his nickname and people wouldn't even remember why. He knew he was in trouble when he got home and his parents were both waiting for him on the couch in the living room. The delicious aroma of cooking brisket made his mouth water, but they didn't seem to have dinner on their minds. "Your sister called," Mom said. "I missed Rena? Can I still call her back?" Omri said. "Sit down, Omri," Dad said. "Okay." Omri sat down in a love seat facing them and placed his backpack at his feet. "Is your computer in there?" Cold panic settled over Omri. He nodded. "Please take it out. Leave it on the coffee table." "What's going on?" Omri placed his laptop on the table. He swallowed. "What did Rena want?" "She was worried about you. She assumed you were home because you dropped out of JROTC," his mom said, stiffly. "Damn it, Rena." "I can explain." "She thought we knew about it. She also asked us about you being harassed online. People are posting things about you?" his dad asked. Omri looked down at his hands. "It's no big deal. Let us see." "I temporarily disabled my account, but I can turn it back on." Omri opened Instagram on his phone and logged in. Once he had restored his profile, he saw notices of about 932 likes on the original photo and 80 new comments. There was a new photo, the same as the printout he'd seen in school with his yearbook photo beside his avatar, and someone had posted pictures of him in his gym shorts as he hunted for his clothes. The sight of his thick, pale thighs even made Omri feel queasy. "Oh, Omri." His mother seemed close to tears. "How long has this been going on?" his dad asked. "Since yesterday." "No, all of this." His father waved his hand around the screen. "Bullying at school." "A couple months," Omri said in a low voice. "Why didn't you say anything to us?" "I thought you'd want me to deal with it myself." His father nodded grimly. "It looks like you've ignored it instead, and that hasn't worked out very well." He glanced at Omri's mother. "You're grounded, without computer privileges." "What?" "You can work on your homework in the dining room, but no games. And when you go back to your room, you leave your laptop with one of us." "That's not fair."
Why are you punishing me?"
"We aren't punishing you. We're protecting you from the hate people are spreading," his mother said. "And we're going to set up a meeting with Mrs. Ehrlich to address these problems and work together to find a solution." Omri clenched his hands into fists.
"This isn't going to solve anything. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm the victim here."
"You lied to us about JROTC. Where were you tonight?" "Not at Rifle Club," his father said.
"How could you quit?" Mom said. "Rena thinks you're making a mistake."
His sister had been supportive when he told her about it, but it was hard to tell with text chats online instead of the sound of her voice. Maybe that's why they hadn't been talking as much lately. Was she disappointed in him? Angry that he'd given up? Omri stood up.
"Fine,"
he said coldly.
"Thanks for your help."
He started to leave the room.
"Dinner's ready,"
his mother said.
"Not hungry. I'm going to my room to reflect on my choices in life."
His parents had made a rookie mistake. They'd forgotten that he still had a computer in his pocket, his smartphone. He even had some games on it. But games couldn't distract him from his problems anymore. He wrote a text to Rena telling her he was pissed that she'd tattled on him, and then deleted it without sending it. She had made an error of judgment talking to his parents, just like he had when he had confided in her. Instead, he read every comment on Instagram about Loki. Every last one of them. This time, instead of moving him to tears, he was furious. At his classmates, but also at himself. His mom was right. He'd run away from his problems and made more problems for himself. He had to do something to make this all go away. Like the wise little green man said, "Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering." He'd even used proper syntax in his sentences, so you knew it was important. Omri was definitely suffering. He posted a comment, "I can't deal with this crap anymore. I give up." Within seconds, responses flooded in. "Once a quitter, always a quitter. Yeah, right. You're so pathetic. What's this, a cry for attention? What would Loki do? Thinking of ending it all? LOL, you wouldn't. Do it. How are you thinking? Hanging? Jumping? Do it. A bullet through the mouth, straight to your useless brain. Better get it done fast. Don't leave it to chance. Do it. Do it. Do it." "You sure you can do it?" Loki asked. Sunita stretched her arms and then cracked her knuckles. "I got this." Jingwei squinted up at the tree branch, stretching over the completed Taiwanese-American saber-toothed tiger pit. They had managed to dig roughly 6 feet down and planted 15 shortened pikes inside it. Then Jingwei and Loki had placed the frame around the opening, slotted the rotating door into its grooves, a perfect fit, of course, and then laid the sod carpet over it all. It looked so seamless, Wesley had almost walked into it already. Loki was mildly disappointed when Gabe grabbed Wesley by his collar, pulling him back just before he stepped on the door. It would have been a great test run, aside from Wesley getting hurt, and they didn't have time to reset the trap anyway. The light was golden red and shadows were creeping into the forest. Sundown. Somewhere, probably close by, the tiger was waking up and getting ready to hunt. Be very, very quiet. Now all they had to do was hang the rabbits over the trap, which turned out to be more challenging than he'd expected. The tree branch was about 15 feet above the trap. They didn't have a long enough vine-braided rope to throw over it and couldn't make more quickly enough. Loki's scavenged cable could reach, but someone had to get up there to tie it on. Gabe, Hiram, and Holden had already tried climbing. Loki didn't bother. He had enough trouble scaling ladders. Then Sunita stepped up and said it was her turn. Loki had wondered why Sunita had volunteered to come along on this adventure. She hadn't seemed like a big team player up until now, but now he thought he got her. She acts like life is daring her to do something dangerous, he thought. No, more like Sunita's daring life to do its worst to her. He had no idea if Sunita believed like he did that they had all died and had been brought to this place for some reason. But the way he saw it, life had already done its worst to them. He could see how that might make someone reckless. Until Cole got hurt, Loki had been wondering whether they could die again. Sunita studied the trees, walking around and tilting her head up to get different angles.
All the while the sun dipped lower, the shadows stretched longer. The air was quickly becoming chill. She slowly looped the cable across her chest like a bandolier, strapping the rabbits securely against her back. "Sunita," Loki began, but he stopped because she was already moving. "Hurry," he thought, "but be careful." She ran toward the tree, leapt like a ballet dancer, and ran up the tree a few steps before jumping off and catching a branch from an adjoining tree, about 7 feet off the ground. She grabbed it like a gymnast on a bar, twirled over it, flipped herself around. She swung her legs back and forth and propelled herself to another branch on the first tree, 10 feet up. Sunita pulled herself onto the branch smoothly and balanced on it, arms out, reminding Loki of a childhood trip to the circus and the acrobats on the flying trapeze. The bough dipped under her weight. She bounced, using it like a springboard to reach a higher branch. 14 feet up. This was like watching an intense platform game. She pulled herself onto another branch and hugged the tree trunk as she stretched a toe toward the nearby branch hanging over the trap. She slipped, and bark and dirt and a couple of leaves came tumbling down. She held on tight. Then she took a few steps back onto her branch. She took one giant step back to the trunk, swinging herself around, fingers barely touching the tree as she used her momentum to carry her over the gap, and she was on the branch. Holden whistled and Wesley clapped. "Shh," Jingwei said. "Wow," Gabe said. Sunita was a freaking ninja. She was Lara Croft. "You do parkour?" Loki said. "Free running." She flipped her hair out of her eyes and looked down, breathing fast. For a moment, she looked surprised that she had made it. "I needed that," she said. She slid farther out onto the branch and straddled it, crossing her legs to keep her balance while she unslung the wire and rabbits. Jingwei winced. If she falls... Loki followed the path Sunita would take if she slipped, right into the trap. If she survived the fall, she probably wouldn't be so lucky with the pointy sticks. "Don't fall," Loki thought. Sunita quickly threaded the cable through the loop holding the animals together, then tied the other end to the branch. She yanked it a couple of times to make sure it didn't slip, then she started lowering the bait. "Hey, I think I hear something," Wesley said. He pointed into the trees. Loki tipped his head and listened. Rustling. It was almost dark already, and the sound sent a shiver down his spine. "We have to go," he whispered. He glanced up at Sunita. She flashed him the thumbs up. She slid down the cable straight towards the trap. Jingwei gasped. Sunita stopped short, close to the bottom of the cable, then started swinging it like a pendulum. She jumped clear with a soft oomph, landing in a crouch a foot away from the trap. "Perfect 10. Let's go," Loki said. They started retreating, but as soon as they left the clearing, he froze and raised his hand to stop the others. He heard a low growl back from where they'd come from. "It's here," he whispered. Visibility was low. If it weren't for the first quarter moon almost directly overhead, they wouldn't have been able to see much at all. Pretty soon they would be trapped in the dark with a predator that could see them fine. Shit. I'm gonna get everyone killed. Loki peeked through the low branches. The tiger was watching the swinging rabbits on their line like a cat with a fishing pole. Damn. Loki tensed as the tiger walked closer to the trap, padding soundlessly, eyes fixed on the rabbit as they slowed to a gentle sway. "Did it work?" Wesley asked. The tiger lifted its head and pricked its ears. Loki rounded on Wesley and covered his mouth. The boy struggled. His eyes were wide and he asked a muffled question. "Shh," Loki hissed softly. Jingwei crept past them gently and looked toward the trap. "It's gone," she whispered. "It fell in?" Loki asked. "No." He took his hand away from Wesley's mouth. The boy's face was as pale as the moon. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Loki turned away roughly. "Great! We had one chance at this." He pounded his fist against the trunk. "Well, that's that," Hiram said. "We should head back to camp," Holden said. "Not yet," Loki said. "The tiger is still out there, and it knows that we're here. It might follow us back to the others, or attack us on the way, or attack us here." Everyone looked around nervously. "We can't fight a tiger, especially in the dark," Gabe said. The trap can still work. We just need more enticing bait. Loki eyed Wesley. I said I was sorry, Wesley squeaked. This is going to be a raid, Loki said. Like in Warcraft? Holden asked. Loki nodded. We have to work together. One of us could distract the tiger, lure it back to the trap, and then the rest of us herd the tiger into it. It sounded totally desperate to Loki as soon as he said it, but he couldn't come up with anything better. I'll distract it, Gabe said. That's bonkers, Hiram said. You can't outrun a tiger, Holden said. I'm really fast. At least I used to be. Gabe put his hand over his chest. And I've never been in better shape than I am now. Are you sure, Gabe? Loki asked. He shrugged. Nope. But unless anyone else is going to volunteer. He looked around. Even Sunita was sitting this one out. Okay then. Gabe started stretching his legs. Gabe, you lead the tiger back to the trap while we circle around. Hopefully the tiger will be in such a frenzy it'll charge straight onto the trap door. If not, we'll close in with our weapons to try forcing it toward the pit. Loki paused. If anyone wants to bow out, that's fine. But our main advantage is our numbers. Could this work? Loki imagined the scenario perfectly in his head, but its success depended on each of them doing their part and working together. Gabe's life would be on the line. All of their lives were at risk. Holden was armed with a board with 2 nails in it. Nice crafting. He'd made it after Jingwei had joked that he should bring a chair and use it like a lion tamer. Hiram had what seemed to be a fire extinguisher that still worked. Wesley had a broom, perfect for helping to clean the mess he'd made. Sunita had opted for one of the shovels, and there was Loki's spear and Jingwei's moose antlers, plus her low-power laser welder, dangling from a makeshift tool belt. And Loki had the rivet gun in his bag, but he risked injuring his own teammates with friendly fire if he tried to hit a moving target in the dark. Here, Gabe. Jingwei offered him one of her antler weapons. Nah, that'll slow me down, Gabe said. You might need to defend yourself. It's lighter than it looks. Take it, she said. Okay, thanks. Gabe took the antler and hefted it. Gabe, try to stay close to the clearing, Loki said. When you hear the signal that we're ready, come on back. We'll be stationed around the trap. When in doubt, run away and don't look back. You got it. What's the signal? Gabe asked. Caw-caw, caw-caw, Wesley demonstrated. How about something like, Gabe? Loki said. Works for me. I'm good to go, Gabe said. Loki looked around. If anyone wants to head back to camp, now's the time. Gabe took a practice swing with Jingwei's bone sword, wielding it like a tennis racket. Sunita was practically bouncing up and down and vibrating with excitement. Wesley would do whatever they told him to. Holden and Hiram looked the least sure, but Hiram thought they were already dead, so what did he have to lose? Holden licked his lips. We're all in. Loki smiled. Game on. Each vicious comment online, each joke and laugh at his expense in the school halls, felt like a drop of poison falling on Loki. Drip, drip, drip. He was trapped, bound up with a leering snake above him, venom falling from its fangs. You should just kill yourself. Drip. In real life, you can't make someone like you by picking the right line of dialogue from a menu. Quitter. Loser. Drip. You can't adjust the difficulty level when things get rough. There are no cheat codes. His character looks that way because he knows how ugly he is in real life. Drip. Real life doesn't come with a way to reset or pause. But it does have an escape key. Do it. The one person who could change his mind, who could change everything, either never saw his comment or didn't think it was worth responding to. She was too busy living her awesome, perfect, video game dream life. Loki read comments on his phone in the dark until the constant flow tapered off and finally stopped as people went to bed. Even assholes need to sleep. He read them again and again until his phone ran out of power. He dropped it on the floor next to his bed without bothering to plug it into the charger. No one was going to call or email him. Then he lay on his bed and stared up at the weird, moving shadows of the trees blowing in the wind,
cast from the street lamp outside his window. Sometime around 4 a.m, it began snowing, but not enough for school to be cancelled. His mother tried to rouse him for breakfast, but he said he was sick, without pretending. He was sick of living. He was sick of being either ignored or ridiculed. After his parents left for work, he climbed out of bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes. He went to his father's study, where he jiggled the locked desk drawer until the old tumbler popped. He slid it open and took out the heavy cloth bundle inside. He unfolded the cloth slowly, thinking about Hanukkah. This was where his dad had hidden their presents for years, since they knew very well that the study, and especially his desk, was off limits. What kind of parent hid a gift in the same drawer as his gun? He wasn't surprised by what he found inside the cloth: a Sig Sauer P228, a semi-automatic pistol that was popular with law enforcement agencies. Loki had held the gun many times. He and Rena had both trained with it on the shooting range. This particular model had been used in the military, where it was called the M11, and his dad had purchased it because of his familiarity with his old service weapon. Of course, most of Loki's experience with the gun had been with virtual versions of it in video games like Half-Life. Loki locked in a magazine loaded with 13 9mm rounds. More than enough. He carried it back to his room and sat with it on his bed, cradling it in his lap. He watched the clock above his bookshelf. If he left now, he could still catch the bus to school. If he left now, he'd have to walk, but he would get there in time for homeroom. If he left now, he'd make it to English class, but there was a quiz that he hadn't done the reading for yet. If he left now, he'd make it in time for lunch. For global studies. For PE. For JROTC. Do it. Loki picked up the gun. He checked the safety and wrapped the gun back up in its silicone cloth. He placed it carefully in his backpack under his dirty gym clothes. Then he left the house and headed for school at a light jog. Even though most sidewalks had been shoveled, he still had to be careful of black ice. He was soon winded, but he pushed on. It was time to level up, or it was game over. Loki stood with his spear raised, eyes scanning the trees around them. Deep in the forest, he heard branches rustling and twigs snapping. He heard Gabe's whooping and the cat's angry hisses that sounded nothing like the wild animal screams in the movies. Gabe had charged out of their hiding place and hurtled across the clearing. The tiger had burst violently from its own hiding place and bolted after him, a blurry streak in the night. Exit. Stage left, pursued by a tiger. Loki had never been more frightened than when he saw Gabe disappear with that large fanged creature on his heels. What have I done? He realized too late that they had forgotten one important thing. The tiger could see better in the dark than Gabe. He was running mostly blind on the tiger's home turf. Now he was afraid of hearing Gabe's shouts turn to screams, or for the noises of pursuit to suddenly stop. For now, he was still alive. He was still moving. Keep moving. Loki picked out the others at their agreed-upon stations around the trap. Loki was at 12 o'clock, Jingwei at 3. Holden was at 6, Sunita at 9. Hiram and Wesley lurked closer to the trap, ready to rush in and startle the tiger toward it if it didn't take the bait, which was Gabe. Jingwei flashed a look at Loki that said, "Can you believe we're doing this?" He shrugged and tried to look more confident than he felt. He nodded at each of them in turn. He counted off 3 on his fingers, and then they all called, "Gabe!" "Caw, caw!" Wesley added. The thrashing in the woods intensified. It was coming closer, but could Gabe find his way back in the dark? "Again!" Loki called. "Gabe! Gabe! Gabe! Gabe!" They chanted the name of their champion. "Get ready," Loki said. Whatever was running toward them was getting closer, dangerously close. He didn't hear Gabe shouting at the tiger anymore to keep it fixated on him. Maybe he didn't need to because it was keeping up, or it had lost interest in him. And they could be drawing the tiger back to them directly. So he was relieved when Gabe tumbled into the clearing first. He bounced back up immediately and raced for the pit. The tiger wasn't far behind him. It scrabbled in the dirt as it swerved to follow him. It was working. Gabe leapt over the trapdoor and skidded on the other side, scrambling backward from the trap.
The tiger kept going, right onto the trap. But as the door began to flip over, it lunged forward, hooking Gabe's leg with one claw and scratching at the grass around the trap with another. "Gabe!" Loki rushed toward them with his spear raised. The others followed suit. Hiram planted his feet and aimed the nozzle of the fire extinguisher on his back at the tiger like a ghostbuster. A foamy white spray sputtered out of it, dousing Gabe and the tiger. Bits of the flame-retardant stuff drifted down like snow around them. Gabe and the tiger slipped closer to the trap. Gabe was screaming bloody murder and hacking wildly at the tiger's paw with his bone blade. Holden ran to grab his arms while Jingwei kept attacking the tiger's paw to get it to release its hold on Gabe's leg. A rock narrowly missed Gabe's head. Another rock hit its mark, pelting the tiger in the back, though it didn't dislodge the animal. "Watch it, Wesley!" Loki called to the kid who was the source of the flying rocks. Loki jabbed at the tiger with his spear. When he drove it into its side, the tiger let out a horrible yowl and finally fell into the pit. "Yes!" Loki gasped with relief. He rushed to help Holden and Gabe, but it was too late. Gabe's grip slipped and he tumbled backwards into the hole. The trapdoor flipped over again to cover the opening. "No," Loki said. "Oh, God," Jingwei said. The raging, mournful crying of the saber-toothed tiger came out of the pit, but Gabe was silent. If he had survived the fall without breaking his neck or getting impaled, he still had an injured tiger to deal with. "Gabe!" Loki pulled up one side of the trapdoor. He couldn't see anything down there. "Someone help me get this door off." Jingwei and Wesley leapt to help him lift the trapdoor from its frame. The others gathered around with worried expressions. "Gabe!" Loki called. "Damn it, we need light." The bottom of the pit was in shadows, though they could hear the tiger's miserable gurgling noises. "Hiram, put down the fire extinguisher and make a fire," Holden said. The young boy gathered some dry grass and twigs, crouched in front of the pile, and struck a chunk of flint against a metal fragment. Sparks turned to smoke, turned to fire. A short while later, Holden carried a burning tree branch over and held it above the trap. The first thing Loki saw was the tiger, impaled on 3 pikes, with 2 others snapped off and stuck in its hide. Its tail twitched, but it was no longer a threat. Sunita made a face like she had smelled something rotten. "Maybe we should put it out of its misery." Loki shrugged out of his backpack. 1 slug from the rivet gun in the head and the tiger would be finished. That was the humane thing to do. He started to unzip his bag, but hesitated. If he took out the weapon now, everyone would wonder why he hadn't used it against the tiger in the first place. And why hadn't he? "What are you doing?" Holden whispered and gave him a funny look. "Check out Gabe, he looks bad." Loki hadn't mentioned the gun yet because he had found it, and he was the best one in the group to hold on to it. He needed to make sure the rest of them believed that too, before he revealed it, or someone like Holden or Jingwei would try to take it from him. But Loki wasn't about to give up his only advantage, the one real thing that made him useful to the group. Carrying their only gun wasn't about status or being a leader. It was about protecting everyone. And now was the wrong time to discuss it. Gabe was lying motionless near the wall he'd slipped from, but had definitely not been impaled, thank goodness. "Is he breathing?" Wesley asked. "We have to get him out of there." Loki tapped Holden on the shoulder with the back of his hand. "Come on." "Huh?" Holden asked. Loki lowered himself over the edge of the pit and hung there for a moment before dropping the rest of the way. A foot away from him, the tiger shuddered and moaned. Its tail switched back and forth slowly. Holden dropped down beside Loki. "How's Gabe?" Jingwei asked. "Unconscious, but breathing." Loki bent over Gabe and prodded him gently. "Nothing looks broken, but his leg was cut up bad, and he could have a concussion." "Should we move him?" Holden asked. "It's the only way to get him back to camp. You take his legs." Loki grabbed Gabe under his shoulders and lifted experimentally. Gabe was as freaking heavy as he looked. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. No. The 2 of them together only managed to get Gabe a few feet off the ground. "Lower him back down," Loki grunted. "Gently." "Maybe Jingwei could make a pulley or something," Holden said. "She's an engineer, not a wizard," Loki said. "She needs materials to work with. We need more manpower." Sunita landed next to Loki, wobbled and grabbed his arm to steady herself. She had simply jumped into the hole. "Need some help, boys?" She bent down and rubbed dirt over her hands. "Let's bring Gabe home." Loki nodded. "You take the middle, Sunita. On 3 again. 1, 2, 3. This time, with Sunita's help, they managed to lift Gabe high enough for Jingwei, Hiram, and Wesley to grab onto him and push and roll him over the edge. "Got him," Jingwei said. Sunita laced her hands together to boost Holden and Loki up. Then she managed to scale the sides of the pit and flip herself over the edge without any help. "We can use the trapdoor as a stretcher," Jingwei said. "We can pull or carry him on that more easily than carrying him alone, and we don't want to abandon it here anyway." "Smart thinking," Holden said, somewhat begrudgingly. Loki, Holden, and Sunita picked up Gabe gently and then laid him on the grassy surface of the former trapdoor. "What can I do?" Wesley asked. "You almost got him killed," Loki said. He stared at Gabe's still face, remembering what he'd said about Wesley. "Just stay out of our way." Wesley slunk off. "Shouldn't we eat the tiger?" Hiram asked. Jingwei said. "We'll leave it for now. Let's not waste any more time before we get Gabe help," Loki said. Loki, Holden, Sunita, and Jingwei each took a side of the stretcher, while Hiram led the way back with the torch, following the marks Loki had made on the trees. Wesley brought up the rear. "Great work back there," Holden said. "Glad to have you on the team, Loki." Loki nodded, suddenly shy. "Do you think that was the only tiger?" Holden asked. "I doubt it," Loki said. "And there are probably even worse threats out there that will find us eventually." "I've been thinking maybe we should move camp after all," Holden said. "Higher ground, you suggested? I wouldn't mind someplace a little more defensible." "I think that's a good idea. But we can't travel far with 2 wounded people. Or at all." Assuming that Cole was still alive when they returned to base. Loki switched his grip on the door. "We may be stuck here for a while yet, so we should make the best of it." They had all leveled up today. Except for Wesley. But Loki was worried. It felt like the game was only now starting, and they were still learning the rules. He studied Gabe's peaceful expression. He doubted they could expect any more bonus lives either. At his lowest moments, after all the bullying at school and online, he thought it would be easy to give up because he had so little to lose. He'd been wrong. He missed Rena. He missed his parents. Even though his family hadn't understood him and hadn't known how to help him, it was important to have people who cared about you, people you could depend on. Loki looked at the people who had come together as a team and risked their lives to protect the rest of the group, who were still working together to carry Gabe to safety. Holden, Jingwei, Hiram, Sunita. Okay, even Wesley. Death hadn't taken everything from Loki. It had given him what he had always wanted, what he had only found in video games. Someone had hit reset on his life, and Loki could be whoever he wanted to be. "I'm not pretending to be a hero anymore," he thought. He could depend on these guys, but even better, they depended on him. Loki had something to live for now, and he was going to make his second life count.
Remade is a Realm original production. You're listening to Remade Season 1 by E.C. Myers. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Listen away. Remade is a Realm original production, created by Matthew Cody and written by Matthew Cody, Andrea Phillips, Carrie Harris, E.C. Myers, Kiersten White, and Gwenda Bond. Produced by Lydia Shama, and executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Starring Greg Tremblay and Laurel Schroeder. Audio directed, produced, and sound designed by Amanda Rose Smith. Additional editing by Corey Barton. Original theme composed by Amanda Rose Smith. Cover art by Liz Castle. Find more shows like Remade by following Realm on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at realm.fm.